I am Dr. Hannah, and welcome to the last MDI series that I have. We are going to talk about correcting high blood sugars between meals today, and that is part of what is helpful to do with shots. Now, there are a lot of ways to treat diabetes. Again, this is education. I am a doctor, I'm not your doctor, so please understand that if you want to make any changes at home, it's great to check with your physician. This is not medical advice, this is just education. What works for me is correcting high blood sugars between meals. I've been doing it since very quickly after I was diagnosed. If I am running high after a meal and I wait until my next meal to give the correction, my blood sugars are not in a range where I want them to be most of the time. That doesn't work for me. And so what I'm going to talk about is how I do that and what strategies make sense to implement around it. So really, there are lots of schools of thought with correcting, and the intention is that we don't want our blood sugar to be out of range, whether it's high or low, but for the standpoint of correction, whether our blood sugar is high for many hours throughout the day. One, because that doesn't set us up for success long term with chronic kind of outcomes that can happen if we have long-term high blood sugar. But also for me, and the most motivating factor is because it doesn't feel good in the now. I know that if my blood sugar is running higher, I feel less present, I feel less able to focus. I feel less, sometimes nice. I feel less like free and happy and giggly and fun. I feel like I'm a little bit more zoned out, tired, not as energetic. And so having blood sugars that are not high between meals is important to me because it allows me to show up in what I want to do that day in a way where I feel more like myself, honestly. So what I do around that is I really look at how long has it been since my last insulin injection. That's kind of, I think, the first question to ask. So I use a continuous glucose monitor. I am, let's say I ate breakfast and maybe I counted my carbs wrong or something was funny there, and I didn't get it in a way that was able to keep my blood sugar in range, and so I'm running high. So let's use the example of 250. That's pretty out of range, and that would not feel good for me to continue until my next meal at lunch. So the first thing I see when my glucose monitor rings at me and says, hey, you're 250, is that I want to do something about it. Typically, I would take an action regardless of how long it had been since I had just eaten breakfast. So let's say I'm 30 minutes out from breakfast. I still have all of that insulin on board from my breakfast dose. And I would ask myself, or I would think to myself, is that because I didn't take enough insulin for the carbs I ate? Or is it because I got my timing wrong? And most often, it's the timing. I see that, like, I may have taken my insulin when I sat down to eat breakfast, and so my carbs started digesting and got into my bloodstream faster than that insulin kicked in and started working. And so I get kind of this blood sugar peak, and then my insulin will start working more and more, and they'll kind of cross, and then my blood sugar will come down. Maybe I'll even be low after. And if that happens, if you get the timing wrong, you're actually more likely to be low after it's the right amount of insulin for the carbs, because you're covering carbs you already digested, and it can kind of create this situation where you've got your timing off and you've got more insulin on board after those carbs are no longer, needing to be digested. That can also lead to long-term highs. There's a couple different outcomes there can be not ideal, but the point, is that we are really looking at why, so let's say I'm thinking like, oh shoot, I didn't count my carbs right. And scenario one, I didn't count my carbs right. I forgot that I had that extra apple, with breakfast, and I'm, 15, 20 carbs off. Then I might think, okay, well, since I'm pretty confident that the reason I'm 250 right now was because I ate more carbs than I calculated for, I'm gonna go ahead and cover for that apple right now so that I at least know I don't have uncovered carbs. And then I'll wait until 2 hours after that initial injection and see where my blood sugar is. what I would ask myself at that 2-hour point, let's say if I'm still high, let's say I'm 200, I might think, well, I have that Apple units on board from 1 hour ago, so that's still working. So I might watch and wait. You know, that might be the best thing to do, to see. Now, if I noticed I was 250 1 hour after, but I got my timing wrong. Let's say I started eating breakfast, forgot, like, oh shoot, I forgot to bolus, and then I bolused, and I just digested my carbs from breakfast faster than my insulin kicked in. I would think, okay, well, I've got a lot of insulin on board for these carbohydrates. Let me wait and see, you know, what's going on. Then I get to that 2-hour mark after breakfast, after that initial insulin bolus. And what I'll do at that point is I'll say, okay, if I'm still 200, I'm definitely going to correct. But I would ask myself, like, what's coming up? Am I planning to eat a snack before lunch in 2 hours? Am I planning to go on a walk? Am I planning to, like, what's happening? And at that point, I would decide whether or not I was going to correct. Let's see. So if I was 250, right, and then 2 hours later, I am 200, and I've decided that I covered all my carbs so that the best I knew, I'm going to want to bring my blood sugar down. Let's say it's a good time for me to take a break at work, and I decide I'm going to go walk my dogs for 15-20 minutes. If I've already got that down arrow, I may not correct. I may wait and see, you know, what happens. I'd drink a lot of water because it's hot here in Texas, and I'd go walk those dogs and keep an eye on my graph. When I got back, if I wasn't still dropping, I might take a correction at that point. If I was planning to go back to work, not eat a snack, just kind of be more sedentary until lunch, I would probably absolutely give a full correction and keep an eye on things. What's really helpful is that when you talk about or think about correcting between meals, if you always have a low snack available, you can be more aggressive with corrections and kind of keep out of those ranges that don't feel as good, in a way that is more effective, because you have that kind of risk management. If you overcorrect, you have the low snack. So when I'm working from home, that works out really well. I can be more aggressive with treating any highs that happen because I've always got apple juice in my fridge, and that's my thing. I go through different phases of what I use, whether it's glucose tabs. I went through a phase with raisins, but the point is that you're really looking at the timing. Now, if I were 200 flatline, let's say 2 hours after the meal, and I wanted to walk my dogs, I might say, well, I'm not still dropping, and I probably need some more insulin. So I might take a half correction and then go walk my dogs. So I'm still going to correct. I'm not going to not act if my blood sugar is high and it's 2 hours after the meal. If I notice that I am still high, so let's say I'm not dropping at all, maybe it's an hour after the meal, I notice the 250, it's an hour and a half after the meal, I notice the 270. Will I give a correction less than 2 hours after my initial meal bolus? Yeah, I do that a lot. I'm just more careful with it, and I'm cognizant that I have insulin on board from the meal that's still kicking in. And in these graphs, if you look up your insulin brand, you can find a graph on Google pretty simply, pretty easy. If you just go to your insulin graph and then the images, you'll see kind of the time frame at which it's going to peak. So you'll see it start kicking in, you'll see it peak at maybe the 2 to 3 to 4 hour. Everybody's different, but the manufacturer will give you an estimate, and then it'll kind of come down. So if I'm going to give a correction before my insulin is peaked, I need to understand that I'm doing what's called stacking insulin. Essentially, I'm just putting a lot of insulin on board, and I don't know exactly how much it's going to move my blood sugar. Now, you can try to calculate it, absolutely. I might not. If I'm going to do an insulin correction at, let's say, an hour and a half after my initial breakfast meal bolus, I would not typically do a full correction at that time. I would calculate maybe what typical correction would be to get me down to where I need to be, and then I would do maybe half or 0.75 if I wanted to do it early, but I just wanted to stop that peak. Now, gratefully, these are not numbers I find myself in often anymore, but you can use the same strategy for lower levels too, right? You can use this strategy anytime you're above what number you would normally start correcting, or whatever you decide. And a great way to think about that is what threshold you choose for the upper limit on your continuous glucose alarm. That's actually kind of how I choose it, is where do I want to start correcting? Because that's when I want that alarm to go off, because that alarm is going to signal an action. That way it's not just an annoying alarm that's like, hey, you're out of range. It's like, hey, you're out of range and let's do something about it now. So there can be different ranges that you pick. That's customizable. It's something you can talk to your doctor about or decide for yourself. But what I have learned from mentors is that you want to start with a higher range. Maybe that's 250 if your blood sugars are out of range often. And then over time, as you get better at kind of managing, not getting to that 250 number, slowly increase that. Maybe you want to increase it to 200. Maybe you want it to be 180. Maybe you want it to be 150. Maybe you want it to be 140. That's a great one for pregnancy, kind of based on what our goals are. And so it doesn't really matter, what that number is for you and what chapter you're in. It matters that that high alarm is set where you would typically start to think about giving that correction. That reduces alarm fatigue, and then it actually makes that alarm kind of more useful. It's like, okay, that's triggering an action. So that's how I have mine set up. Again, not the only right way to do it. There's so many great ways to do this, and so many ways that work that are different for different people. But these are tips and tricks that have really helped me. So absolutely, I correct in between meals. Let's say I gave a correction 2 hours after lunch. I was 200 flat line. I was gonna sit back down at my desk. I gave a full correction. What I would do then is I would wait until lunch. And if at lunch I was 150, I may not do another correction, let's say a unit, which would be my conversion, to get me from 150 to 100 on top of my lunch meal bolus, because I want to remember that I have insulin on board from that correction. And so shots, when you're on shots, it's a lot more calculating, managing not just thinking about what to do in the moment, but what have I just done? And really thinking at that 2 hour mark, most insulins are going to be peaking, but that doesn't mean they just stop working after 2 hours. Like, they're still going down, right? It's like a bell graph. And so you'll see it go up, it peaks at 2 hours, but then at 3 hours, there's still some insulin left. And at 4 hours, there might be a little bit of insulin left. And so you want to understand that when you're making these decisions, and create habits of starting to, if you use this strategy, starting to subtract out insulin that you corrected for between meals, so you're not overcorrecting and then creating future lows. I really hope that was helpful. I know that was a little complex, but talking it out sometimes is the easiest way to start thinking about these things, and then bringing that new understanding into life, where you're looking at your CGM and making these decisions. Even if you are not used to thinking about correcting between meals, or previous, corrections between meals, that you would change the way you add on a correction or an additional correction at the following meal. These are things to start thinking about. Well, what would happen? Would that be something to do differently? And a great way, now that you know to think about it, is then you could not do it, right? Or do what you're currently doing, not change anything, but do your current patterns and say, oh, I wonder if I'm low now after this meal because I accidentally double corrected. I didn't think about how that correction between breakfast and lunch hadn't fully finished kicking in, or was still insulin on board, insulin in my system. So when I corrected again at lunchtime, I overdid it, and now I'm low after lunch. At least now you can see, okay, I think I can see where that's coming from. In the future, I might reconsider, or let me talk to my doctor to see if this is okay. I mean, you really want to be careful about making changes at home. And I'm not recommending you do. I'm recommending that you talk to your doctor. But I think that these kind of things are really important to start asking yourself, because there can be ways where you feel better if you're not getting the results that you want after meals. And if you have type 1 diabetes, you're probably not getting the results you want after meals often. I mean, you may be really good at understanding carb counting. You may be really good at understanding your ratios being perfect, but there are gonna be variables, right? There's gonna be that label that was wrong. There's gonna be that restaurant you ate at where you guessed wrong. And you're gonna have to do more insulin after meals because you didn't get it right the first time. That's gonna happen. That happens to me all the time, but it doesn't mean that I don't have blood sugars that I wanna have in the range that I want them to be in. that's part of it, I think. There are gonna be times where I'm more stressed and I'm gonna need more insulin, with a meal, because I've got a speech coming up or a test coming up. Those things are hard to calculate, right? There's no equation for board exam in 4 hours and you use what percentage, for your insulin. We could try to make those, but then would they work all of the time? Probably not, right? There's too many variables. So what's really empowering, I think, about the correcting between meals, you know, strategy or techniques is that you can make mistakes and still get to places that you want to be, you know, for most of the day as far as where your blood sugars are. And so I think that that is part of being, you know, confident with insulin. I always, if I'm giving a correction and I am not eating a meal, I always have low snacks available. I think that's number one, really important. And I didn't go over this in the treating the lows, you know, video maybe as much as I should, but it's a lot easier to be confident with insulin dosing if you've got like a risk management strategy, which is a low snack in your pocket or your purse or your bag or whatever. And one low snack's usually not enough. Like if I'm gonna go walk my dog and I'm 200 and I give a correction and I'm gonna go on a 30-40 minute walk and I have one juice box with 12 carbs, I'm not gonna be confident on that walk, because if I go through that correction, let's say I gave a full correction because I wasn't thinking about what was coming next, and I go low and I am 20 minutes out from my house and I only have 12 carbs, I might go low twice, right? Might have enough to treat the low initially, but I might not have enough for the whole walk back home. That's gonna leave me not confident. And actually, if I realized that as I was walking, I'd probably turn around sooner. So what I do is multiple low snacks. That way you've got a lot of ammunition for life that happens, or, you know, making mistakes. And when I have multiple low snacks available, I'm not so worried, you know, about correcting. If I'm on a road trip and I've got a whole bottle of glucose tabs in my center console and I'm running high, I'm gonna give a full correction even though I'm driving, because I know that I will see if I start to drop on my CGM and then I'll be able to treat it. But if I've got, you know, driving for 5 hours, I can't just have one low snack in the car, right? Otherwise I have to pull over and that's not gonna feel good. I really don't like dropping while I'm low and not having a low snack. I try to avoid that at all possible, or as much as possible. So have low snacks available, have multiple treatments for what it takes for you available so that you can be more confident with corrections. That is what works for me. That works for other people I know too. But understanding what it takes and then remembering to subtract out activity from lows or corrections between meals, and remembering to subtract out previous insulin and looking at that 2 to 3 to 4 hour time range, remembering that that insulin comes in a bell curve, not in this kind of on off. It doesn't just stop working in 2 hours. That's important too. So I hope that this was helpful. If this brought up more confusion or questions for you, because this is a new way to think about things, please ask questions below. I am really doing my best to try and explain these complex, multi-variable topics in ways that make sense and are easy to grasp onto, easy to think about, easy to understand, and if you wanted to implement them, easy to repeat to your doctor so you guys can get on the same page about what it is you want to try and understand, you know, whether or not it would be safe for you. So I hope that I am doing that, and I am very new at this. So any feedback you have on these types of videos covering these types of topics would be really helpful. I'm open to corrective criticism. I'm also open to understanding what's working so I can repeat that. If you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel. It'll allow me to make more free videos for people with type 1 diabetes like you. I appreciate you being here, and thanks for listening all the way to the end.